The sun rose lazily over the hills of Denver, casting a golden glow over the lush fields of the Thompson farm. Emily, still drowsy, opened her bedroom window and took a deep breath, letting the scent of wildflowers and morning dew fill her lungs. It was her daily ritual before starting her chores on the farm. At 16, Emily was a young woman of simple beauty, her wavy brown hair framing a delicate face. Her large, expressive brown eyes seemed to see beyond what most people could perceive. And indeed they did. "Good morning, Dad," she exclaimed as she entered the rustic kitchen, where William was drinking his strong coffee. "Good morning, sweetheart. Heading out to the stables already?" asked William, a middle-aged man with a face weathered by the sun and a lifetime of dedication to the land. "Yes, Stella is about to give birth and I want to be there to help her." William frowned, a gesture Emily knew well. It was the silent sign that her father didn't entirely approve of her approach. "You know animals have been having offspring for millennia without needing help, right?" "I know, Dad. But Stella is special. She trusts me. I can feel she's nervous." William sighed. It was always like this. His daughter seemed to have an almost supernatural connection with the farm animals, something he, despite decades of experience, had never quite understood. "Just be careful, and don't forget we have the county fair in 2 weeks. We need to prepare the horses." Emily nodded and hurried out, crossing the farm's central courtyard toward the stables. Along the way, she was greeted by various animals, curious chickens, dogs wagging their tails excitedly. Even the usually aloof cats came to brush against her legs. When she reached the stable, Emily found Stella, a spotted mare, visibly restless. The young woman approached slowly, whispering words of comfort. "It's okay, Stella, I'm here with you." The mare whinnied softly, as if recognizing Emily's voice. Her eyes, large and expressive, seemed to tell a story of fear and anticipation. "I know you're scared, it's your first time, but everything will be fine, trust me." With gentle movements, Emily began stroking the mare's neck, establishing a soothing rhythm. It wasn't just her words. There was something in Emily's touch, in the cadence of her voice that calmed animals in a way no one else could. At a nearby farm, Edward Wilson watched through binoculars. Edward was a respected veterinarian and breeder in the area, a man around 50 with a passion for animals that rivaled Emily's. He had been following the young woman's talent for years, fascinated by her innate ability. "Impressive, isn't it?" he remarked to his assistant, Philip Anderson, a local young blogger who was filming everything with interest. "I've never seen anything like it. How does she do it?" "That's the thing, Philip. She doesn't do it. It's something natural, like breathing. Emily has a gift that many of us seasoned professionals spend our lives trying to develop." Philip smiled, adjusting the camera to capture the scene better. "This is going to be amazing for my blog. Imagine when people see what she can do with Bruno." Edward shook his head, concerned. "Bruno is different, Philip. His wounds go beyond the physical. I'm not sure even Emily is ready for that challenge." Back in the stable, Emily helped Stella through the birth, guiding the foal with gentle hands and words of encouragement. When the little animal was finally in Emily's arms, the mare showed silent gratitude, tenderly licking the young woman's face. William watched from a distance, a mix of pride and worry in his gaze. His daughter had a gift, no doubt. But the world wasn't always kind to those who were different, who defied conventions, and the county fair, with all its expectations and judgments, was fast approaching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know which city you're watching from, and stay tuned. The town of Denver buzzed with preparations for the annual agricultural fair. Colorful banners hung over the downtown streets, merchants set up their stalls, and breeders from across the region readied their finest animals for display. In the air, a mix of anticipation and competitiveness lingered. At the Thompson farm, William oversaw the loading of the horses to be taken to the fair. His methods were traditional, direct and often inflexible. To him, respect was something earned through firmness and authority. "Put more strength into the halter, Jacob," he instructed the young helper who was trying to guide a horse into the trailer. "This animal will only respect you if it senses who's in charge. Emily watched from a distance, biting her lip in silent disapproval. Her perspective was completely opposite. To her, respect was a two-way street, something built with kindness and understanding. "Dad, can I try?" she asked, stepping closer. William hesitated. He knew his daughter had a special way with animals, but he worried her approach might be seen as weakness by the other breeders. "Fine, but make it quick. We're on a tight schedule." Emily approached the animal, a majestic black horse that snorted nervously. Instead of yanking the halter or giving commands, she simply stood there, breathing calmly, looking into the horse's eyes. "Hi, Thunder. I know you're scared, but I promise everything will be okay. Trust me." To Jacob's amazement and William's reluctant admiration, the horse calmed almost instantly, following Emily into the trailer without resistance. "How do you do that?" Jacob asked, awestruck. "I don't do anything. I just talk to them, listen to what they have to say." William cut the moment short, his voice rougher than he intended. "That's all very nice, but in the real world animals don't talk, Emily, and not everyone has time to chat with them." The tension between father and daughter was palpable, but it was interrupted by the sound of an approaching car. It was Edward Wilson driving his pickup truck with a large trailer attached. "Good morning, Thompson," Edward greeted, stepping out of the vehicle with a warm smile. "I brought a surprise for this year's fair." Emily approached, curious. The relationship between her and Edward was special. He had been one of the first to recognize and value her natural talent, becoming something of a mentor to the young woman. "What surprise, Edward?" The veterinarian gestured for her to come closer to the trailer. Inside, partially visible through the bars, stood a majestic buffalo with dark fur and eyes that reflected a mix of anger and fear. "This is Bruno. He was rescued from a circus a few months ago. I'm trying to find a buyer for him at the fair, but as you can see, he's not exactly friendly." Emily felt her heart race. There was something in the buffalo's eyes, a deep pain she could sense, even from a distance. "What did they do to him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Edward sighed, his face hardening momentarily. "Abuse, years of it. He was forced to perform humiliating tricks, treated like a circus attraction, not a living being. When he refused to obey." He didn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. Emily could see the scars, both physical and emotional, that marked Bruno. "Do you really think you can get him ready for the fair?" asked William, skeptical. "No one's going to buy a buffalo that might attack at any moment." "That's where I was hoping Emily could help," Edward replied, his eyes meeting hers. "If there's anyone who can reach Bruno, it's her." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The challenge was immense, far greater than anything she'd ever faced. But there was something in the way Bruno looked at her, an immediate and inexplicable connection. "I can try," she finally said. William intervened immediately. "Absolutely not. That animal is dangerous, Emily. Did you see its size? The stories about its aggression? This isn't one of your docile horses or friendly little dogs." "Your father is right to be concerned," Edward agreed. "Bruno is unpredictable, but I also believe that if anyone can help him, it's you, Emily." The young woman looked at the buffalo again. For a moment, their eyes met, and she felt something she couldn't explain, a connection, a mutual understanding that transcended words. "I'll do it," she declared, with a determination that surprised even herself. William shook his head, clearly displeased, but he knew his daughter rarely changed her mind once she made a decision. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I promise, Dad." At that moment, neither of them could have imagined that this encounter with Bruno would be just the beginning of a journey that would change not only Emily's life, but also how the entire community viewed the relationship between humans and animals. The Denver Agricultural Fair was a burst of colors, sounds, and aromas. Stalls of traditional food spread across the grounds, mingling with displays of farming equipment and pens where animals of various species were proudly showcased by their breeders. Country music echoed through the speakers, adding to the festive atmosphere. In the area reserved for larger animals, a small crowd began to gather. The reason for such interest: the buffalo Bruno, who had been announced as one of the event's main attractions. Stories about his ferocity and turbulent past were already circulating among visitors, creating an aura of mystery and danger around the animal. Edward Wilson, in his impeccable veterinarian uniform, tried to organize the space, keeping the onlookers at a safe distance. Bruno remained restless in his pen, his eyes alert to every movement around him, his flared nostrils catching the countless unfamiliar scents. "Keep your distance, please," Edward repeated, concerned for both the people's safety and the stressed animals' well-being. Among the growing crowd, Philip Anderson stood out, not just for his youth, but for the professional filming equipment he carried. At 25, Philip dreamed of turning his Rural Curiosities blog into something bigger, maybe even landing a spot on a television channel. "Did you get the footage from yesterday, Philip?" Saiz asked Edward, approaching the young blogger. "Yes, they turned out great. The way Emily interacts with the animals is incredible," he replied enthusiastically. "Speaking of which, where is she? I thought she'd already be here." For the demonstration with Bruno. Edward checked his watch, slightly concerned. She should be here any minute. William was a bit hesitant about letting her participate in this. As they spoke, the murmur of the crowd grew louder. Emily had just arrived, walking beside her father with a mix of determination and nervousness etched on her young face. Dressed simply, jeans, riding boots, and a plaid shirt, she seemed oblivious to the curious glances following her. "Let's get this over with," said William, his voice tense as they approached Edward. "Good morning, William, Emily." Edward greeted. "Everything ready?" Emily nodded, her eyes already fixed on Bruno, who seemed to sense her presence. The buffalo stopped moving, as if sizing up the newcomer. "Are you sure you want to do this, sweetheart?" asked William, placing a protective hand on Emily's shoulder. "No one will think less of you if you change your mind." "I need to do this, Dad. I feel like I can help him." William exchanged a worried glance with Edward, who merely shrugged. Both knew that once Emily made up her mind, it was nearly impossible to change it. Philip positioned himself strategically, adjusting his camera to capture every detail of what was about to happen. He had a feeling something extraordinary was coming. "We're ready when you are, Emily," Edward said. "Remember, no sudden movements, and if you feel he's too agitated, leave the pen immediately." The young woman nodded, taking a deep breath to calm her racing heart. This wasn't just another animal. It was an entirely new challenge. Bruno carried scars that went far beyond the physical, and the fear he inspired was justified. Even so, she couldn't help but feel there was a connection between them. Something she couldn't rationally explain. With measured steps, Emily entered the enclosure. The crowd, which had been murmuring excitedly, suddenly fell silent. It was as if everyone collectively held their breath. Bruno immediately noticed the intrusion into his space. His muscles tensed, his head lowered slightly into a clearly defensive stance. A deep snort escaped his nostrils, making William instinctively step forward, ready to intervene. "Easy, Dad," whispered Emily. Never taking her eyes off the buffalo, she stopped a few yards away, respecting the animal's space. She didn't try to get closer or make any sudden movements. She simply stood there, breathing calmly and rhythmically. "Hello, Bruno," she said, her voice soft, almost melodic. "I know you're scared. I would be too, in your place." The buffalo shifted his head, his eyes fixed on the stranger, who dared invade his territory. There was confusion in his gaze, as if he couldn't understand the lack of fear or aggression. "I won't hurt you," Emily continued. "No one here will." To everyone's surprise, Bruno took a step forward. It wasn't an aggressive move, but a curious one. The crowd let out a collective sigh, as Philip frantically adjusted the focus on his camera. The moment was shattered by a loud crash. One of the visitors had accidentally knocked over a nearby metal structure. The sound echoed through the enclosure, like a gunshot, startling Bruno. In an instant, the buffalo transformed. Snorting furiously, he charged toward Emily with startling speed for an animal his size. "Emily!" shouted William, about to leap over the fence to save his daughter. But to everyone's astonishment, Emily didn't run. She stood perfectly still, raising one hand in a calm gesture while maintaining eye contact with the enraged animal, Ati. The last second, when it seemed inevitable she'd be struck, Bruno skidded to a halt, stopping just inches from her. The silence that fell over the fair at that moment was almost palpable. Bruno, the buffalo, feared by all, stood just inches away from Emily, breathing heavily but not advancing. The animal's eyes, once filled with fury, now showed an almost palpable confusion. "It's okay," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible to the buffalo. "It was just a noise, you're safe." Slowly, without sudden movements, she extended her hand, not to touch the animal, but as an invitation, a gesture of trust. Bruno took a step back, still wary, but his initial ferocity had vanished. His body, once tensed for attack, now appeared more relaxed. William, who had been about to leap over the fence to protect his daughter, stood frozen by the scene. Edward, beside him, wore a faint smile, as if finally confirming a long-held theory. The crowd, recovering from the initial shock, began to applaud spontaneously. Philip, who hadn't missed a single second of what happened, checked the footage on his camera with barely contained excitement. "That was incredible," he exclaimed to no one in particular. "I got it all on video." Meanwhile, inside the pen, a silent connection had been made. Emily, now sitting calmly on the ground, allowed Bruno to approach of his own will. The buffalo, still cautious, took small steps toward her, sniffing the air as if trying to decipher this human who was so different from the others he'd known. "I know you've been through a lot," Emily continued in the same gentle tone. "But it's over now, you can start fresh." Gradually, as time passed, the initial tension faded. Bruno, though still keeping a respectful distance, no longer showed signs of aggression. The demonstration, which was supposed to last only a few minutes, stretched to nearly an hour, with Emily simply talking to the buffalo, letting him grow accustomed to her presence. When she finally stepped out of the pen, she was met with enthusiastic applause and a flood of questions. Local journalists covering the fair immediately surrounded her. "How did you calm the buffalo?" one asked, microphone in hand. "Do you have a special technique?" another pressed. Emily, visibly uncomfortable with all the attention, only smiled timidly. "There's no technique, it's just respect. I try to listen to what they have to say, even if they don't use words like we do." William, stepping closer, placed a protective arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I think that's enough for today," he declared, guiding her away from the press. "My daughter needs to rest." But the story was only just beginning. That same night, Philip posted the full video on his blog and social media. The caption was simple but effective. "Miracle in Denver. Young girl tames fierce buffalo with just a look." The effect was immediate. Within hours, the video had been shared thousands of times. Enthusiastic comments poured in from all corners of the country. "I've never seen anything like it. It's like she speaks their language. That girl has a divine gift." But as expected, not all reactions were positive. Self-proclaimed experts began questioning Emily's methods. "This is dangerously irresponsible. She could have been seriously hurt. Without proper training, she's just getting lucky. One day that luck will run out. She's putting the animal's life at risk too. Buffaloes aren't pets." In the Thompsons' small house, oblivious to the digital storm brewing, Emily sat on the porch watching the stars with a mug of hot chocolate in her hands. William approached, settling into the rocking chair beside her. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "Okay," she replied with a faint smile. "It was intense, but I felt like Thunder was trying to communicate with me, Dad. He's so afraid, in so much pain." William sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "You scared me today. When he charged, I thought—" He couldn't finish the sentence, emotion choking his voice. "I knew he wouldn't hurt." "Me," said Emily, holding her father's hand. I could see it in his eyes. The house phone rang, interrupting the moment. William got up to answer it, returning minutes later with a puzzled expression. It was Edward. "Apparently you've become an internet celebrity." Emily frowned, confused. "What?" "That blogger guy, Philip. He posted today's video and it's, what did he say again, going viral." The next day, the quiet life of the Thompson family was completely upended. Reporters from major outlets started showing up, wanting to interview the Buffalo Whisperer, as Emily was being called. The phone wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests, TV show invitations, and even book offers. Philip, now enjoying unexpected popularity thanks to the video, became a constant presence on the farm, always with his camera ready. "This is amazing, Emily," he exclaimed, showing her the view count on his phone. "Over 1 million views in less than 24 hours. They're calling you the Buffalo Whisperer." Emily, uncomfortable with all the attention, simply smiled politely. Fame wasn't what she sought. Her only concern was Bruno and his well-being. The tea. Routine at the Thompson farm had been completely disrupted. What was once a peaceful refuge, where Emily could connect with the animals in tranquility, had now become a pilgrimage site for reporters, onlookers, and self-proclaimed animal behavior experts. William, ever protective, tried to screen visitors, shielding his daughter from the constant harassment. "I can't take this anymore, Dad," Emily vented during breakfast, a week after the incident with Bruno. "I can't even go to the stables without someone following me, asking questions, taking pictures." William nodded sympathetically. The situation was affecting not just Emily, but also the animals on the ranch, who were growing increasingly restless with the constant presence of strangers. "I know, sweetheart, but this will pass. It's like that storm last year, remember? It felt like it would never end, but it did." Emily sighed, not entirely convinced. The comparison was understandable but simplistic. What was happening was far more than a passing phenomenon. It was a fundamental shift in her life. The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. William answered, his expression shifting from initial irritation to surprise, then to thoughtfulness. "Who was it?" Emily asked when he finally hung up. "Edward Wilson." "The animal behavior expert, the one who gives international lectures?" "Yes, that one. He saw Philip's video and wants to meet you. He's offering a specialized training opportunity." Emily's eyes lit up for the first time in days. Edward Wilson was a legend in the field of animal behavior, known for his revolutionary and ethical approach. His books and lectures had inspired a new generation of handlers and veterinarians to abandon traditional methods in favor of a more compassionate approach. "He wants to meet me? Me? Not just meet. He wants to offer you a personalized training program. He said he's never seen anything like what you did with Bruno and believes you have a natural talent that can be refined." Emily could hardly believe it. It was as if in the midst of the chaos her life had become, a beacon of hope had appeared. Someone who truly understood what she did, someone who could help her further develop her connection with animals. "When is he coming?" "That's the thing. He's not. He wants you to go to his training center in Aspen. It would be 6 weeks of intensive training." Emily's initial excitement gave way to hesitation. 6 weeks away from home, away from her father, away from the animals she knew and loved. "I don't know, Dad. That's a long time." William surprised her with his answer. "I think you should go soon." "Really?" "Yes. Edward Wilson is internationally respected. If he sees something special in you, it's because it's really there. Besides," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "this could be your chance to prove to everyone that your method works, that it's not just luck or coincidence." Emily understood what her father wasn't saying. To William, this was an opportunity to legitimize his daughter's approach, in the eyes of a world that valued diplomas and certificates more than natural gifts. "What about Bruno?" she asked, worried. "I promised Edward Wilson I'd keep working with him. I spoke to Edward yesterday. Actually, he's considering taking Bruno to the same training center. He thinks it would be good for the buffalo to be in a more controlled environment and, of course, to have you nearby." The idea of continuing her work with Bruno, especially under Edward Wilson's guidance, was tempting. Still, something bothered her. "What about Philip? He won't stop following me around with that camera, posting everything on social media." William smiled, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Dad, I've already resolved this. I told him that if he wants to continue documenting his journey, it'll have to be in a more respectful way. No privacy invasions, no posting anything without your prior approval." That same day, Edward Wilson showed up at the farm to discuss the details. He brought news about Bruno. "He's been calmer since meeting you," he explained as they walked toward the stable. "He still keeps his distance from people, but the aggression has decreased significantly." Emily smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. Knowing she had made a difference, however small, in the life of that suffering animal was rewarding. "When is the trip to Aspen?" she asked. "Next week. Edward Costa is eager to start working with you. He has an interesting theory about your ability." "What theory?" "He believes people like you have a special sensitivity to animals' nonverbal language. It's not magic or a supernatural gift, like many are saying on social media. It's an enhanced ability to perceive and interpret the subtle signals animals constantly emit." The explanation made sense to Emily. She never believed she had magical powers. She simply felt a deep connection, an understanding that went beyond words. "What about the training program? What exactly will I learn?" "Edward will teach you advanced positive reinforcement techniques, body language, and interspecies communication methods. But more importantly, he wants to learn from you too. Your intuitive approach is something he believes could revolutionize the field of animal behavior." The idea that someone so renowned wanted to learn from her was both flattering and intimidating. Emily had always trusted her instincts, never really questioning how or why she could connect so deeply with animals. As the day went on, her excitement about the opportunity grew. This could be her chance not only to develop her gift, but also to legitimize it in the eyes of a skeptical world. More importantly, it could be an opportunity to help animals like Bruno, who carried deep scars from mistreatment and abuse. "I'll accept the offer," she finally announced during dinner, much to William's evident satisfaction. "I'm sure it's the right decision, my dear." What neither of them could foresee was how this decision would transform not only Emily's life, but also her entire understanding of the relationship between humans and animals. A new journey was about to begin, filled with challenges, discoveries, and inevitably, new twists. If this story has captured your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Let us know which city you're watching from, and let's continue. The mountains of Aspen rose majestically against the blue sky, their slopes covered in dense vegetation, swaying in the cool morning breeze. It was a scene completely different from the plains of Denver, where Emily had spent her entire life. The Animal Training and Behavior Center run by Edward Wilson was located in a secluded area about 20 minutes from town, surrounded by nature on all sides. "It's beautiful," Emily whispered as the car climbed the winding road leading to the property. Edward Wilson, who was driving, smiled at the young woman's awe. "Wait until you see the animals. Edward Wilson works with rescuing species from all over America. Some are rehabilitated and released back into the wild, while others, unable to survive on their own, remain at the center." When they finally arrived, Emily was greeted by an impressive facility. Far from being just a simple training center, the place resembled a full-fledged village. There were multiple stables, enclosures adapted for different species, a state-of-the-art veterinary hospital, and various lodgings for students and researchers. At the main entrance, a tall, athletic man with graying hair and piercing blue eyes awaited them. "Welcome," exclaimed Edward Wilson, stepping forward to greet them enthusiastically. "You must be Emily Thompson. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Emily felt a sudden nervousness in the presence of this man, whose reputation preceded him. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Wilson. Please, just Edward. We're not very formal here," he replied with a warm smile that immediately put her at ease. "I imagine you're tired from the trip, but I'd like to show you something before you settle in." He guided them through the complex, explaining the center's operations and its work philosophy. Emily watched everything with fascination, noticing how calm and well-adjusted the animals seemed, even those that, according to Edward, had been rescued from traumatic situations. "Here it is," he said finally, stopping in front of a spacious enclosure. "Your friend arrived yesterday." Inside the pen, grazing calmly, was Bruno. The buffalo looked different, more relaxed, though he still had that watchful gaze Emily knew so well. "He's adapted surprisingly quickly," remarked Edward Wilson. "Normally, animals with a history of trauma take weeks to get used to a new environment, but Bruno seems at peace." When he heard Emily's voice gently greeting him, the buffalo lifted his head, his ears twitching toward her. For a moment it seemed like he might approach, but he kept his distance, simply watching. "It's a good start," said Edward. "He recognizes you, but he's still adjusting to the place. Let's give him time." The days that followed were intense for Emily. Edward Wilson's training program was rigorous but deeply rewarding. In the mornings, there were theoretical lessons on animal behavior, applied neuroscience, and advanced methods of interspecies communication. The afternoons were dedicated to hands-on work with various animals at the center, from horses rescued from abuse to foxes and wolves in rehabilitation. Edward Wilson was an exceptional teacher, combining deep scientific knowledge with intuition almost as sharp as Emily's. He didn't just teach, he also watched closely how she interacted with the animals, taking detailed notes and often asking her to explain what she felt during those moments of connection. "It's like I can feel what they feel," Emily tried to explain after a particularly intense session with a traumatized horse, not in words but in sensations, images. "Deep empathy," Edward replied thoughtfully. "You have a natural ability to establish what we call neural bridges with other species. Most people need years of training to develop anything close, and even then, they never reach your level of intuition." Philip, who had been granted permission to document Emily's training under controlled conditions, filmed these sessions with fascination. His blog had almost entirely transformed into a documentary about her journey, attracting followers from around the world. "People are truly inspired by your story, Emily," he commented during a break. "I've gotten messages from veterinarians, trainers, even parents of autistic children who say your approach has made them rethink how they communicate with animals and each other." The news surprised Emily. She had never thought of her gift as something that could impact people beyond the world of animals. On Thursday nights, the center held public lectures where experts discussed various aspects of animal behavior. It was during one of these lectures, in her third week of training, that Emily faced her first major public challenge. The topic was traditional methods versus intuitive approaches in handling traumatized animals, and Edward Wilson had invited Emily to join the panel. Among the guests was also Dr. Richard Bennett, a respected veterinarian, but known for his conservative stance on animal training methods. "With all due respect to young Thompson," said Dr. Bennett during the debate, his voice polite but with an undertone of condescension, "we cannot base an entire scientific approach on isolated cases of special connection. Animal handling requires discipline, structure, and yes, sometimes firmness." The audience, composed of students, professionals, and curious onlookers, watched attentively, waiting for Emily's response. Edward Wilson gave her an encouraging look. "I'm not suggesting we ignore science, Dr. Bennett," she replied, surprising everyone with her calm and articulation. "I'm suggesting we expand it. Animals have a voice even if they don't speak our language. When we choose to listen to that voice instead of imposing ours, we discover a whole new universe of possibilities." The debate grew heated, with arguments exchanged from both sides. To many's surprise, Emily held her ground, defending her approach with a mix of newly acquired knowledge and innate wisdom that impressed even her harshest critics. By the end of the night, after the conference, Edward Wilson sought her out. "You were brilliant today," he said, proud. "You showed it's not just intuition. You deeply understand what you're doing." Emily smiled, tired but satisfied. "I've learned so much here, Edward, but I still have one question that's been with me from the start. Why Bruno? Why did he connect with me like that when he resists so many others?" Edward thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe because you didn't try to tame or control Bruno. You simply saw him, saw beyond the anger, beyond the fear. For an animal who spent his whole life being judged and feared, being truly seen might be the greatest gift anyone could give." That explanation resonated deeply with Emily. In a way, she and Bruno weren't so different, both misunderstood, both judged by what others saw on the surface, without truly understanding what lay beneath. There was just 1 week left in the training program, and Emily felt transformed. The theoretical knowledge had deepened her instinctive understanding, giving her the vocabulary and structure to explain what had once been just intuition. Her connection with animals, always natural, was now also conscious and intentional. But there was one aspect that still troubled her progress with Bruno. Although the buffalo already recognized her and allowed her to approach, there was still an invisible barrier between them. Unlike the other animals at the center, with whom Emily had built deep bonds of trust, Bruno maintained a reserve she couldn't fully break through. "I don't understand," she vented to Edward Wilson as they watched the buffalo grazing calmly in its enclosure. "With the others, I feel like we've truly connected. With Bruno, it's like he's still waiting for something." Edward studied the animal thoughtfully before responding. "Maybe it's because you don't know his whole story yet." "What do you mean?" "Edward Wilson told me about the circus, the mistreatment." "Yes, but there's more," Edward replied, his expression grave. "Something we recently discovered when we received the full rescue documents for Bruno." He led Emily to his office, a cozy room filled with books, maps, and photographs of animals of all species. From a drawer, he pulled out a folder and handed it to her. "I thought you should know." Emily opened the folder and began reading. As she absorbed the information, her face paled. The report detailed not only the physical abuse Bruno had endured at the circus, but also how, before that, he had been violently separated from his herd as a calf to be sold illegally. Even more devastating, when he resisted training at the circus, the head trainer had slaughtered another buffalo in front of him as intimidation. "This is—" Emily couldn't finish, tears streaming down her face. "Horrific, I know," Edward said softly. "Bruno didn't just suffer abuse, he witnessed extreme violence used as a method of control. That's why his fear runs so deep and his anger is so intense." Emily closed the folder, her heart heavy. Now she understood why Bruno kept his distance. It wasn't just self-preservation, but a deep distrust born from the worst kind of betrayal. "What can I do?" she asked, more to herself than to Edward. "What you're already doing," he replied, showing him that not all humans are the same, that there is another path beyond violence and control. That afternoon, Emily went to Bruno's enclosure with a new perspective. She didn't try to approach him physically, as she had done in recent weeks. Instead, she simply sat outside the fence at a respectful distance and began to speak. "I know what happened to you, Bruno," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know about your family, about what they did, and I'm sorry. Truly sorry." The buffalo, grazing a few meters away, lifted his head and looked in her direction. There was something different in his posture, an attentiveness that went beyond mere curiosity. "You don't have to trust me. You don't have to come closer. I just want you to know that not all of us are like that. And no matter what happens, I'll never use fear or pain to connect with you." For nearly an hour, Emily stayed there, sometimes speaking, sometimes in contemplative silence. Bruno, initially distant, gradually moved closer until he was just a few meters from the fence. To Emily's surprise, he snorted softly and lowered his head, a gesture she had learned to recognize as a sign of relaxation in cattle. It wasn't surrender or submission, but a small, precious moment of trust. Philip, filming the scene from a distance, felt a lump in his throat. He had started this project seeking fame and professional recognition, but now he found himself unexpectedly moved by Emily and Bruno's journey. That night, Edward Wilson invited Emily for a conversation in his office. Philip and Edward Wilson were also present. "There are only a few days left in the program," Edward began, "and normally this would be the time to evaluate your progress and discuss next steps. But in this case, I have something different in mind." He paused, looking at each of them before continuing. "The work you've been doing here, Emily, goes beyond individual training. What we're witnessing is the birth of a new approach in the relationship between humans and animals, especially those carrying deep trauma. What are you suggesting?" Emily asked, intrigued. "A public demonstration. An opportunity to show the world that there's an alternative to fear-based control, that even the most traumatized animals can find their way back to trust without coercive methods." Emily felt a chill in her stomach. "With Bruno?" "Yes. Edward Wilson and I have already discussed it, and he agrees it would be a powerful message. Philip could document everything to ensure the story is told correctly." The proposal was both thrilling and terrifying. A public demonstration would expose both her and Bruno to a level of pressure and scrutiny they'd never faced before. What if I fail? What if Bruno reacts badly to the crowd, the cameras? Then we'll have learned something valuable, replied Eduardo Costa, calmly. Failure is also information, Emily, but honestly, I don't believe you'll fail. What I see between you and Bruno is something rare and precious, the beginnings of genuine trust. The young woman reflected on everything she'd learned in recent weeks, about Bruno's story, the science behind interspecies communication, her own journey of self-discovery. Everything seemed to converge on this moment. What exactly would this demonstration look like? She finally asked. Nothing forced or theatrical, Eduardo Costa assured her. Just you and Bruno, showing that it's possible to overcome fear and distrust through mutual respect. If he allows your touch, it'll be incredible. If he simply stays calm in your presence, that alone will be a huge victory. Emily looked at Edward Wilson, who nodded encouragingly. I believe in you, Emily. And more importantly, I think Bruno does too. Philip, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. I can promise you the documentation will be respectful. Nothing sensationalized, just the truth about what the two of you have built together. After a few moments of reflection, Emily made her decision. I'll do it. Not for me, not even for Bruno, but for what it could mean for other animals who've suffered like he has. The news that the Buffalo Whisperer would hold a public demonstration with the animal that made her famous spread quickly. Philip posted an announcement on his blog, now followed by thousands, and the specialized media quickly picked up the story. Within hours, Edward Wilson's phone wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests and invitations from television networks. In her downtown room, Emily was trying to mentally prepare for the challenge she had accepted. Part of her was excited about the opportunity to show the world a more compassionate way to interact with animals. Another part, however, feared the consequences of public failure, not just for herself, but especially for Bruno and everything he represented. That night, she called her father, needing his support more than ever. Do you think I'm doing the right thing, Dad? She asked after explaining the situation. William was silent for a few moments before answering, his voice heavy with emotion. When you were little, do you remember that mare everyone said was untamable? You were only 10, but you insisted. You could help her. Your mother, here his voice wavered slightly, was so proud of your way with animals. She said you saw something in them that others couldn't. The mention of her mother, who had passed when Emily was just 12, brought tears to her eyes. I'd forgotten about that, she said, moved. She would be so proud right now. Emily, and so am I. Trust your heart. It's never led you astray when it comes to animals. The 3 days leading up to the public demonstration passed in a whirlwind of activity. The Animal Training and Behavior Center had turned into a hive of people, staff preparing the space, journalists filing preliminary reports, technicians setting up sound and video equipment. The chosen area for the event was a wide-open field, with natural bleachers formed by a gentle hillside, ensuring perfect visibility for all spectators. Emily, however, kept her distance from the commotion. Following Edward Wilson's advice, she spent most of her time with Bruno, not attempting any specific training but simply strengthening the bond they'd built. Sometimes she sat near the fence reading aloud, a technique she'd learned at the center, where the steady rhythmic sound of a human voice helped desensitize traumatized animals. How are you feeling? Edward Wilson asked, joining her. The afternoon before the big day, Emily closed the book she'd been reading to Bruno, a George Loveday novel her father had sent from Denver. Nervous. But not so much for me, more for him, she replied, nodding toward the buffalo grazing peacefully a few yards away. I'm worried about how he'll react to so many people, so much noise. Edward nodded understandingly. That's why we've taken some precautions. The audience will be at a safe distance, the sound will be controlled, and we'll have a full team of veterinarians on standby just as a safety measure. But what if he gets scared? What if all this pressure is too much? Then we cancel, Edward replied simply. Emily, this isn't a circus show where the performance must go on at all costs. It's a demonstration of mutual respect and understanding. If at any point you feel Bruno is uncomfortable, Just give a signal, and we'll end it right there. Her mentor's words reassured her a little. This wasn't an all-or-nothing situation. It was an opportunity to show that animal welfare should always come first. There's something else I'm worried about, she confessed after a moment of silence. The expectations. Everyone expects me to do something extraordinary, something magical. Edward smiled gently. The real magic is in the ordinary, Emily. In the simple fact that a deeply traumatized animal allows you to approach without fear. There don't need to be flips or elaborate tricks. Just the peaceful presence of the two of you together will be proof enough of what we're trying to demonstrate. On the morning of the big day, Emily woke before dawn, too restless to stay in bed. She dressed simply in jeans, boots, and a white shirt, nothing that could distract or startle Bruno with bright colors or unusual textures. She tied her hair back in a ponytail and, after a deep breath, stepped out to face the day that could change her life forever. The sky was just beginning to lighten when she reached Bruno's enclosure. The buffalo was already awake, watching her with those deep eyes that seemed to read her soul. Emily smiled, feeling an unexpected calm wash over her. "Good morning, friend," she greeted softly. "Big day today, huh?" She opened the gate and stepped into the pen, something she now did often, though always keeping a respectful distance. Bruno watched her but showed no signs of unease. It was immense. Progress compared to the aggressive, fearful animal she had met months ago. Philip appeared shortly after, camera in hand, but stayed outside, as agreed. "Can I film some of the preparation?" he asked quietly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful atmosphere. Emily nodded, and he began capturing delicate shots of the interaction between the young woman and the buffalo. There was no spectacle here, just the quiet beauty of two beings building mutual trust. Edward Wilson joined them an hour later, bringing William Thompson, who had arrived the night before. "Dad!" Emily exclaimed, stepping out of the pen to hug him. "I didn't know you were already here." "I got in late last night. Didn't want to wake you," William replied, holding her tight. He glanced over his daughter's shoulder at the imposing buffalo. "So this is the famous Bruno." "Yes, want to meet him?" William hesitated but finally agreed. Emily guided him to the fence, keeping a reassuring hand on his arm. "Bruno, this is my dad, William." The buffalo studied the newcomer with a cautious gaze but showed no signs of aggression. William, in turn, watched the animal with a mix of respect and admiration. "I never thought I'd say this about a buffalo, but he has kind eyes," he remarked finally. Emily smiled, touched by her father's effort to understand what she saw in these animals. The next few hours were spent on final preparations. Edward Wilson gathered the whole team for a last briefing, emphasizing that safety, both Emily's and Bruno's, was the top priority. Veterinarians reviewed emergency protocols, though everyone hoped they wouldn't be needed. As the time for the demonstration approached, Emily felt growing anxiety. It wasn't fear of what might happen, but genuine concern about how Bruno would react to so many unfamiliar faces. Philip, sensing her unease, approached. "Remember that first video I took at the fair?" he asked, adjusting his camera. "Back then I was just chasing clicks, some views. I didn't really understand what was happening between you and Bruno." "And now?" asked Emily, curious. "Now I see it's about much more than a gift or a special ability. It's about respect, patience, understanding. It's about seeing the other for who they truly are, not how we want them to be." Philip's words touched Emily deeply. In a way, he had captured the essence of what she'd always tried to express, but never found the right words for. Edward Wilson, who had insisted on being there to follow Bruno's progress, approached the small group. "The first spectators are arriving," he informed, looking at Emily with a paternal expression of concern. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? We can still cancel." The young woman glanced at Bruno, who calmly observed the growing activity around his enclosure, showing no clear signs of stress. Then she looked at her father, at Philip, at Edward Costa and Edward Wilson, people who had believed in her, supported her journey in different ways. "I want to go ahead," she declared with a conviction that surprised even herself. I think Bruno and I have something important to show today. A crowd was beginning to gather on the hill that would serve as a natural grandstand. Journalists positioned themselves strategically, cameras aimed at the pen where the demonstration would take place. Among the spectators, Emily recognized familiar faces, students and staff from the center, breeders from the region, and even some of the critics who had questioned her methods in previous weeks. Dr. Richard Bennett, who had debated with her during the conference, was there, watching with scientific interest. Emily gave him a discreet nod and he returned it with a respectful gesture. They weren't necessarily allies, but there was a mutual recognition of the importance of what was about to happen. In one final moment of preparation, Edward Costa gathered everyone directly involved in the event. Remember, we're not here to impress anyone. We're here to demonstrate an approach based on respect and mutual understanding. Any sign of discomfort from Bruno, and we stop immediately. Everyone nodded, committed to the animal's well-being above all else. William hugged his daughter one last time before she prepared to enter the pen. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. Emily smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. Her father, always so traditional in his methods, was there, supporting her in an approach that challenged everything he'd learned in decades of working with animals. The moment had arrived. Edward Wilson stepped onto a small platform to welcome the attendees and briefly explain the purpose of the demonstration. "What you will witness today is not a show or a spectacle," he emphasized into the microphone. "It is a testament to the power of compassionate communication between species, the possibility of healing deep emotional wounds through respect and understanding." As he spoke, Emily took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself. There were no rehearsed tricks, no script to follow, just her and Bruno, and whatever would unfold naturally between them. An expectant silence fell over the place as Emily, after one last exchange glance with her father, walked toward the gate of the enclosure where Bruno waited. The midday sun bathed the field in golden light, creating an almost cinematic scene. Philip, positioned strategically, captured every moment with his camera, aware that he might be documenting something potentially historic. "Good morning, everyone," Edward Wilson began, his calm voice amplified by the speakers. "Before we begin, I'd like to establish a few ground rules. We ask for absolute silence during the demonstration. Any sudden noise or abrupt movement could affect both Emily and Bruno. Remember, we are not here to watch a performance, but to witness a new form of interspecies communication." Emily silently thanked him for those introductory words. They helped set the right atmosphere, reminding everyone that this was not a circus attraction, but a moment of genuine connection. Taking a deep breath, she opened the gate and stepped inside the enclosure, carefully closing it behind her. Bruno, grazing a few yards away, lifted his head at her entrance. Their eyes met, and for a moment she feared the presence of so many people might have negatively affected the buffalo. But to her relief, Bruno simply continued to watch her, showing no signs of agitation or fear. In fact, he seemed almost curious about what would happen next. Emily smiled inwardly. This curiosity, this openness to the unknown, was immense progress for an animal that once reacted aggressively to any human approach. "Hi, Bruno," she greeted, softly, her voice barely audible to the buffalo. "I know there are a lot of people here today, but don't worry. We're in this together." Emily began moving slowly around the enclosure, not directly toward Bruno, but in a circular pattern that allowed her to maintain a respectful distance. This movement, which she had learned from Edward Wilson, was a form of non-verbal communication. It showed the animal that she acknowledged his space, that she wasn't there to invade or dominate. The crowd watched in absolute silence, many leaning forward in their seats, trying not to miss a single detail. Dr. Richard Bennett, initially skeptical, now observed with visible fascination. William, standing beside Edward Wilson, alternated between pride and worry, his fingers nervously gripping the railing in front of him. After several minutes of this circular motion, Emily stopped and sat on the ground, crossing her legs in the lotus position. It was a calculated gesture of vulnerability, By sitting, she placed herself at a physical disadvantage, showing Bruno that she posed no threat. The buffalo observed this change with renewed interest. After a moment of apparent reflection, it began to move. Not toward Emily, but in its own circle, mirroring the pattern she had established earlier. The audience collectively held their breath. This wasn't rehearsed, wasn't expected. It was Bruno's spontaneous response, a form of communication he had chosen on his own. "He's mirroring her behavior," Edward Wilson whispered to those nearby. "It's a sign of recognition, of understanding." Emily remained still, allowing Bruno to set the pace of the interaction. The buffalo completed its circle and then, to everyone's surprise, began to approach slowly. There was no aggression. In its movements, only cautious curiosity. When it was about 3 meters away, it stopped, its gaze fixed on Emily. "It's okay," she said softly. "You decide how close you want to get." Bruno let out a gentle snort, a sound Emily had learned to interpret as neutral, neither pleasure nor discomfort. Then it took another step forward, closing the distance between them. The atmosphere was electric. Philip, who was filming every second, felt a lump in his throat. What he was witnessing went far beyond a simple technical demonstration. It was genuine communication between two beings of different species based on mutual respect and understanding. With deliberately slow movements, Emily extended a hand, palm up, not attempting to touch Bruno but offering the possibility if he chose to accept. The buffalo observed the gesture, its nostrils flaring slightly as it caught Emily's familiar scent. What happened next left the audience in shock. Bruno took another step forward, and after a moment of hesitation, stretched its muzzle until it nearly touched Emily's outstretched hand. There was no physical contact, but the proximity was closer than anyone had ever witnessed between the buffalo and a human. William, watching the scene, felt involuntary tears streaming down his face. Never in decades of working with animals had he witnessed such a deep and respectful connection. Beside him, Edward Wilson seemed equally moved, his eyes shining with admiration for his young protégé. Dr. Richard Bennett, who had always advocated for more traditional animal handling methods, was visibly shaken. What he was witnessing challenged many of his most deeply held professional convictions. Emily and Bruno remained in that position for nearly a minute, her hand outstretched, his snout just inches away, both completely still, except for their gentle breathing. It was as if time had stopped, as if nothing else existed beyond that moment of mutual understanding. Then, in a move no one could have predicted, Bruno took the final step and gently touched Emily's hand with his snout. It wasn't a prolonged touch, just a brief, delicate contact, but its meaning was immense. It was the first time the buffalo had deliberately initiated physical contact with a human without any sign of fear or aggression. A collective sigh swept through the audience, followed by reverent silence. Philip, recognizing the magnitude of the moment, captured a perfect close-up of the meeting between the human hand and the buffalo's snout, an image that would later become iconic, symbolizing a new era in the relationship between humans and animals. After the brief contact, Bruno took a few steps back, not out of fear, but as if to say, "That's enough for today." Emily, respecting his decision, slowly lowered her hand and remained seated, a serene smile on her face. "Thank you, Bruno," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Edward Wilson, sensing the moment had reached its natural peak, stepped up to the microphone. "What we've just witnessed," he began, his own voice betraying his emotion, "was more than a demonstration of technique. It was living proof that when we abandon methods based on domination and control, and instead adopt an approach of respect and mutual understanding, we can forge connections that once seemed impossible." The audience, finally released from their hushed silence, erupted into applause. It wasn't loud or exuberant like the applause at a conventional performance, but restrained and reverent, acknowledging the sacredness of what they had just witnessed. Emily rose slowly, keeping her movements gentle so as not to startle Bruno. With one last grateful glance at the buffalo, she walked toward the gate. As she stepped out of the enclosure, she was immediately embraced by her father, who couldn't hold back his tears. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered, holding her tightly. Philip approached, camera still in hand, but with an expression of deep respect. That was incredible, Emily. Just incredible. Journalists began to gather, eager for interviews and statements, but Edward Wilson intervened, positioning himself between them and Emily. Please, let's give her a moment to process what just happened. There will be time for questions later. Emily silently thanked her mentor for his protection. What she had just experienced with Bruno was deeply personal, almost intimate, and she needed time to fully absorb it. As she was guided away from the growing crowd, Emily looked back one last time. Bruno remained where she had left him, watching her from a distance. And though it was impossible to assign human emotions to an animal, she could have sworn there was peace in his eyes, a peace that until now had never been there before. 6 months had passed since the historic demonstration in Aspen. Autumn painted the landscapes of Denver in gold and red, and a cool breeze swept through the fields of the Thompson farm, now transformed into something entirely new. Emily walked among the new enclosures, observing the freshly built facilities with satisfaction. What was once a traditional family farm had become the Emily Thompson Institute for Animal Rehabilitation and Wellness, a dream she hadn't even known she had until Edward Wilson planted it in her mind, right after the overwhelming success of her demonstration with Bruno. "The world needs what you have to offer, Emily," he had said that memorable afternoon. "Not just your natural connection with animals, but your vision, your approach, your philosophy. Think of how many traumatized animals could benefit from it." Philip's video had become a global phenomenon, watched by millions worldwide. The image of Bruno gently touching Emily's hand had turned into a powerful symbol of a new kind of relationship between humans and animals, one based on mutual respect and genuine understanding. Offers and invitations poured in quickly: international speaking engagements, book deals, television program proposals. But what truly captured Emily's imagination was the idea of creating a specialized center for rehabilitating traumatized animals, using the methods she had developed and refined during her time with Edward Wilson. Her father, William, initially hesitant about transforming the family farm, ended up becoming her most enthusiastic supporter. The weeks he had spent at the training center, observing his daughter's work, had profoundly changed his perspective on the relationship between humans and animals. "It took me 60 years to realize there was so much more to learn," he confessed one night, as they planned the necessary modifications to the farm. "I'm proud to be part of this change, even if it's late in life." The institute had only been open for 2 months, but it was already home to numerous animals referred by protection, NGOs, zoos, and rescue centers. Horses traumatized by years of abuse, dogs saved from abandonment, and even some wild species, needing behavioral rehabilitation before being released back into nature. "Emily!" called Philip, approaching with his ever-present camera. "They're here." Emily's heart raced. This was the moment she had been waiting for weeks. A large veterinary trailer entered the farm gates, driven by Edward Wilson. Beside him in the passenger seat, Edward Wilson chatted animatedly. The two had become frequent collaborators at the Institute, combining Silver's clinical expertise with Wilson's scientific and methodological knowledge. The trailer parked near the largest and most well-equipped enclosure, specially prepared for its new occupant. When the rear doors opened, Emily couldn't hold back a wide smile. Bruno, the buffalo who had changed her life, emerged calmly from the trailer, guided only by a loose rope that Edward Wilson held more as a formality than actual control. The animal looked different. His stature was still imposing, but there was a tranquility in his eyes that contrasted dramatically with the tormented gaze of a year ago. "Welcome to your new home, friend," Emily said, stepping forward slowly. Bruno recognized her immediately, his ears twitching toward her in a gesture she had learned to interpret as a greeting. Without hesitation, the buffalo walked toward her, stopping at a respectful yet comfortable distance. Edward Wilson let go of the rope, confident it was no longer needed. "He's improved so much in the last few months," she remarked, watching the reunion with satisfaction. but we always knew this would be his true home. The original plan was for Bruno to remain at the training center in Aspen, where he had made so much progress. But when the institute opened, both Edward Costa and Edward Wilson agreed that the buffalo's place was beside Emily, not just as another rescued animal, but as a living symbol of the institute's philosophy. "He'll be our ambassador," Emily explained to the journalists present, who had been invited to document Bruno's arrival. A constant reminder that even the deepest scars can heal when approached with respect and understanding. Among the guests was Dr. Richard Bennett, who had become an unlikely ally after the demonstration in Aspen. Initially skeptical, he now collaborated regularly with the Institute, bringing his vast clinical experience, now paired with a newfound openness to alternative methods. "Science evolves when we challenge our own certainties," he had told Emily during his first visit to the farm. "You taught me that." William Thompson watched from a distance, a proud smile on his weathered face. Seeing his daughter achieve something so meaningful, something that defied generations of traditional practices, filled his heart with a joy he could barely express. When Bruno was finally led to his new enclosure, a spacious area with shaded spots, an artificial pond and various environmental enrichments, everyone could sense they were witnessing not just the start of a new chapter in the animal's life, but a milestone in a quiet revolution in how humans relate to other species. "I'd like to propose a toast," announced Edward Costa during the lunch that followed, raising his glass. "To the Emily Thompson Institute, where animals are not seen as creatures to be tamed, but as individuals with their own stories worthy of respect and understanding." Everyone raised their glasses, including Philip, who for the first time had set his camera aside to fully embrace the moment. "And to Emily," added her father, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught us to listen to what was always there, but we never had the patience to hear." After the celebrations, when the guests had left and the Institute was preparing to close another day of work, Emily found a quiet moment alone to visit Bruno. The buffalo rested peacefully beneath a sprawling tree, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "We did it, Bruno," she said softly, sitting just outside the fence. "You and we changed things." The buffalo lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers with a clarity that still surprised her. There was no fear in that gaze anymore, no anger, no distrust, just a quiet acceptance, and perhaps something that in a human would be called gratitude. A gentle breeze stirred Emily's hair, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers. In that moment of perfect harmony with nature, she felt she had found her true purpose. It wasn't just about animals or humans, but about building bridges between worlds that had long been separated by walls of misunderstanding. The Institute was only the beginning. There were already plans for expansion, for educational programs that would bring their philosophy to schools and universities, for international collaborations with other research and rehabilitation centers. The journey would be long and undoubtedly filled with new challenges, but Emily felt ready to face them. "Who would have thought, huh?" A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Philip, approaching with a friendly smile. "It all started with a video. I didn't even really know what I was filming." Emily smiled, remembering that first encounter at the county fair, when Philip was just an ambitious blogger chasing clicks, and she was a teenager with a misunderstood gift. "Life sometimes takes us down unexpected paths," she replied thoughtfully. "I have a proposal for you," Philip said, sitting beside her. "I've been talking to some production companies. They're interested in making a full documentary about the Institute, about your methodology, about Bruno. Not just to entertain, but to educate." Emily considered the idea. A year ago, she would have refused immediately, wary of any kind of exposure. But now she understood the power of visibility, not for herself but for the cause she championed. "As long as the focus is on the animals and the methodology, not on me," she finally answered. "And as long as we can control how the story is told," Philip nodded eagerly. "I wouldn't have it any other way. I believe in this work as much as you do." The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting its last golden rays over the Institute. In the distance, the sounds of various animals blended into a natural, comforting symphony. Emily thought about her journey, from the girl who whispered to horses on a small farm to the founder of an internationally recognized institute. And it had all started with a buffalo named Bruno, an animal everyone had given up on, except, "You know, Philip," she said, watching the last ray of sunlight fade, "I've always believed animals had so much to teach us, but only now do I realize just how much. They teach us about forgiveness, about trust, about starting over even when it seems impossible." Philip nodded, understanding the depth of those words. "What's next?" he asked. Emily looked at Bruno, now resting peacefully, free from the shadows of the past. Then she gazed at the institute that bore her name, a dream realized through hard work and passion. Finally, her eyes traced the sky, now dotted with stars, symbols of all the possibilities the future held. "Now," she replied with a serene smile, "now is the beginning of a new story. For Bruno, for me, for all of us. A story where humans and animals walk side by side, not as masters and servants, but as companions on a journey, each with their own voice, each with their own worth." Philip smiled, realizing he was witnessing something truly revolutionary. It wasn't just about training techniques or rehabilitation methods. It was about a fundamental shift in how humanity related to the other species sharing the planet. "To this new story," he said, raising a hand in an imaginary toast, "I'm eager to document it." Emily laughed softly and returned the gesture. "And I'm eager to live it." As they walked back toward the main complex, where welcoming lights began to flicker on, Emily cast one last glance at Bruno, the buffalo, as if sensing her gaze, lifted his head toward her. They were no longer strangers, not even just friends. They were living symbols of a possibility, of a future where understanding replaced fear, where respect replaced domination. A future that, thanks to them, was already beginning to take shape. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know which city you're watching from.